It's back into it in Chester. Here's El Senior. Yes! Yes!
The center back, Jacob Glesnes.
He's going for it.
Yes! Oh my goal! What a goal!
And that will do it. One of the best comebacks in recent years. 3 unanswered by the Union. And they go into the Gold Cup break, winning it 3-2.
Hello, welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd, and the wait continues for the Philadelphia Union to get their first ever win in Dallas as the Union fall 1-0 Wednesday night against FC Dallas in a game which was, I hate to say it, but really extremely boring. And I have no problem with 1-0 games if teams are creating chances. But that really wasn't the case Wednesday night between both of these teams. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. And before we get into some news, which, there really isn't a ton of news to talk about midweek. The only news we'll bring up is Transfer Market updated their player value. So we'll go over that news. We'll get into, obviously, the game. We'll get into Blunder of the Week, 3 stars, goal breakdown, reviewing my keys to the game, which you guys might be saying, you didn't do a preview episode. Well, you guys would know I did keys to the game if you read my article on Wednesday. So if you guys did, thank you. If not, hey, it's all good. You guys are listening to the podcast. So either one, I'm happy with. You guys are checking out this content. I am happy either way. But fans on social media, on Twitter, are saying, yeah, last night's game against Dallas was the worst game of the season. And when I was in Cincinnati, fans were like, yeah, this is our worst game of the season. And I do tend to agree that the game against Cincinnati was our worst game of the season because we lost 3-1. Our first time ever giving up 3 goals this season. But, the one game that really does stick in the back of my mind, and I don't see a ton of fans talking about this game. People mentioned the loss last night. People mentioned the loss to Cincinnati. People mentioned the loss to Chicago. And yes, I know losses are worse than draws because at least in a draw you get a point. But the one game that really sticks out in my mind that was, you can argue this was our worst game of the season if you don't want to say the Cincinnati loss was the worst and you want to mention the Montreal game at home as the worst, I would not say you're wrong. I do think that Cincinnati was the worst, but this Montreal game that ended 1-1 back in April, I think about this game constantly. And you talk about the lack of offense from the Union last night. I mean, the game against Montreal, the Union only had 4 shots in that game, if you guys remember. And the Union's only goal in that game came off of a penalty kick from Julian Kranza in the first half, I believe it was. And if I'm remembering that game correctly, the Union did not deserve a penalty. It was a weak penalty. I believe it was weak contact on Julian Kranza, but the referees give the penalty anyway. Julian Kranza goes ahead and converts the penalty. But yeah, it wasn't a great game offensively from the Union. And then in the second half, the Union give up a goal. Game ends 1-1. But, we talk about, the Union looked bad offensively against Cincinnati. The Union looked bad last night. They looked bad against Chicago offensively. But seriously, the game against Montreal, when you only have 4 shots in a game and your biggest chance of the game was a penalty kick, I don't know. That was a terrible game. I remember the passing was off. We didn't have a ton of corner kicks in that game. We kept fouling. The Union just looked off the game. And I remember when I recorded that episode, I don't think I was that upset because we had went into Montreal and won in Montreal where I didn't think we were going to win that game there, especially indoors when that field was horrible. And I was like, okay, fine. We're probably going to lose this game. We win that game, and then you think for sure, all right, the Union don't lose at home. And then they draw 1-1 to Montreal. So I don't know. I do think Montreal is up there as one of the worst games. I don't think last night's game was the worst game we've ever seen from the Union this season. Yes, I'll say top three. I was going to say you guys can say top three, but I'm confident enough to say that yes, top three worst games we've seen this season. Because at least the game in Chicago, we created some chances. Corey Burke hit the post or something like that, right? Right at the start of the second half. So it's not like we weren't creating chances. But last night and against Montreal, we were not creating chances. And the only difference in that Montreal game is we got a point compared to last night where we didn't get a point. I don't think we played badly enough where we didn't deserve a point, but we definitely didn't play good enough to get all 3 points. So that's kind of my thoughts on people talking about the worst game for the Union. It's definitely not that, but would love to hear you guys' thoughts. What do you guys think has been the worst game so far this season for the Union? As we all know, the Union have only lost 4 games this season. They've conceded 20 goals on the season, which is the fewest in MLS. And I know Jim Kirchin's talked about the fewest goals conceded in a season, which is 27. Odds are the Union probably aren't going to match that record or beat that record. But, we should still applaud the way that the Union are playing defensively this season. But without further ado, let's just get straight into the news. All right, so like I said in the intro, Transfer Market updated their MLS player values on Thursday, and the last time that happened was in November of 2021, so it's been a minute. And so I'll go ahead and give you guys the top 10 highest valued Union players. I'll give their 2021 valuation and now their current valuation, starting off with Julian Kranza, who was valued at $3.3 million in 2021. He's valued at $4.4 million now. Kai Wagner was also valued at 3.3 in 2021. He's also at 4.4 now. 3, Daniel Gazdag was at 2.2 million. He is now at $3.8 million. Mikhail Uhre is number 4. He was valued at 3.3 million. He is up to 3.8 million now. Jacob Glesnes is 5, was 2.2 million. Now he's 3.3 million. 6 is Leon Flock, 2.2, now up to 3.3. Paxton Aronson, he stayed the same from November 2021 till now, which is valued at 3.3 million. Andre Blake was valued at 3.3 million in 2021. He went down to 2.7. And Jack Elliott was at 2.2 million. He is up to 2.7 million right now. And then the last player for the Union is Jack McGlynn, valued at 1.6 in 2021. He is now up to $2.2 million. And so right off the bat, when I posted this on Twitter, fans were a little bit upset. Some people were DMing me saying, oh, why is Andre Blake so low? This can't be right. Andre Blake's the best goalie in MLS. And yeah, we all know that, right? But the way that Transfer Market values their players, and it makes sense. This is how teams around the world value players as well. But Transfer Market, they go ahead and look at the current market value for players in that same position. They go ahead and look at the development potential, their reputation, the prestige, how good they are in the position. They go ahead and look at how they're valued in the specific league. They go and look and see, okay, well, what's the highest experience players have played at? How many years are left on their contracts? What national team the players play with? Do they get caught up a lot with the national team? Have they been sold in the past? And so all of those figures go into how Transfer Market valued each of these players, and that's not just for MLS, that's just how they value players in general. And like I said, also, that's how teams in the real world also value players. Now, obviously, you're going to have teams value their players different than how other teams may look at their players, but at the end of the day, I don't see the need to get as upset as some Union fans were getting when I posted this on social media. And I think the one that fans are most upset about is Andre Blake. Like I said, he's the only one to decrease from last year to this year, and Andre Blake's arguably having another career year in MLS. And it's like, okay, how can he be having that kind of season and he goes down in value? But I think what factors into Andre Blake is, one, his contract's coming down. Two, he's 31 years old, which isn't old at all for a goalkeeper, but he's definitely not getting any younger. And so both of those are going to play a huge factor. And then maybe the biggest factor is he plays for Jamaica. And Jamaica's not the best national team. And because of that, he's not going to be valued that high. We all know, right? We all know the story how West Ham United, I believe in 2016, 2017, apparently wanted to buy Andre Blake, but Andre Blake couldn't get a visa to work in England because Jamaica wasn't rated high enough in the FIFA rankings. And so the move never materialized. And so the Union have been very fortunate to keep Andre Blake for as long as they have. But at the same time, like, come on. $2.7 million for Andre Blake. If he was playing in a league in Europe, if he was playing for a different national team, I mean, Andre Blake's easily, in my opinion, a goalkeeper that should be valued at $10 million. I mean, let's look and see what Matt Turner went for from New England to Arsenal. Now, I get it, right? Matt Turner plays for the USMT. They are higher rated than Jamaica. Matt Turner, I believe, is also younger than Andre Blake. But at the same time, like, I don't want to have this conversation because I feel like we had this conversation sometime last year towards the end of the season when I compared Andre Blake's numbers to the rest of the goalkeepers. But you can definitely argue that Matt Turner and Andre Blake have been 1-2 the last couple seasons in MLS. And now that Matt Turner's gone, like, I think it's pretty clear and obvious that Andre Blake's the best goalkeeper in MLS. But regardless, yeah, it is funny to see that transfer market decides that, yeah, Andre's value's gone down. Like, no, it hasn't. Like, this guy saves us so many points. But, at the end of the day, the people that are coming up with these values are fans. And so I don't really get too concerned. I know fans are like, oh, how can Kai Wagner be $4.4 million? I mean, it makes sense because after 2023, he'll be a free agent, so he doesn't have that long left on his contract. But at the end of the day, like, fans shouldn't really be getting upset. The one thing I guess I would question is how isn't Jack Elliott valued the same as Jacob Glesnes at $3.3 million? I mean, both of those guys, I feel like, are the same quality center back. But at the end of the day, I'm not upset as most fans are. One thing that's interesting, though, is, so like I mentioned, transfer market also valued the clubs. And this isn't just, okay, how expensive the club is as a whole. It's just, okay, the value of your team because of the players you have. The Union come in at number 13, which I think's a huge credit to Ernst Tanner because of buying these players cheap in Europe or getting Julian Kranzer for free from Inter Miami, and getting Julian Kranzer put you up to $4.4 million because you essentially got him for free. And so it is interesting to see the Union not spend a ton of money, but they're valued at the 13th highest club in terms of player value in MLS. Your top five are Atlanta United at $73.8 million, LAFC $71.5 million, Toronto $66 million, Seattle Sounders $55.5 million, and NYCFC are valued at $54.2 million. The Union, they're valued at $43.6 million, which, again, it isn't bad at all. All the credit goes to Ernst Tanner for what he's able to get out of the players that he finds. Jim Curtin for just the coaching job that he does with these players, developing them. And if you go ahead and look at the highest rated players in MLS, I mean, just credit to like the players that MLS has been able to bring in the last couple of years. And yes, this list is very top heavy with the teams that spend the most in MLS. But number one is Asenye with Toronto. He's valued at $22 million. Then number two, you have Thiago Almeida with Atlanta United, 16.5. Both him and Asenye have lost value in the last year. Jose Cifuentes of LAFC, He is valued at $11 million. He's been fantastic this season for LAFC, by the way. I believe he has 7 goals as a midfielder. Unbelievable. Then you have number 4, Sebastian Drusi, who's also at 11 million with Austin. And then number 5 is Emmanuel Reynoso, also at 11 million. And then Talus Magna is also at 11 million. I mean, there's a whole bunch of players on this list. Then you get into like 8.8. There's like 6, 7 players listed at that. So, I mean, you have a ton of players in MLS that are valued between, I mean, minus the top 2, between 11 million to 5 million. There's multiple players within that value rating in MLS, which is just huge credit to the league for, one, developing these players. And a lot of these players, too, by the way, are young players. And so we say it all the time. I say it all the time on the podcast. And again, to the Euro snobs that want to say, oh, it's a retirement league, just go ahead, look at this list by Transfer Market to see how young these players are in MLS and how much of their values went up since playing in MLS. But you bring that up to Euro snobs, they don't want to hear it. No, that can't be right. That's MLS. That can never be the case. They're always signing these over-the-age players. I mean, some of these people you cannot convince otherwise. And the same is with the USMNT fans, where they're now starting to creep into Union Twitter saying, oh, the Union need to play Paxton Aronson, Jack McGlynn to increase their value. It's like, oh my gosh. Like, I was just talking to some people the other day. I'm like, with all these Euro snobs hating on MLS, it makes me want to just be fully committed to the U.S. national team. But then at the same time, too, like, U.S. national team Twitter is the absolute worst. Like, these guys, you cannot satisfy them. And it's like, I don't want to be associated with these people. I don't want to get involved and just get mad because of these stupid takes. But yet, these Euro snob takes make me even more mad. And so it's like, I can't win. Like I want to support the U.S., right, because of Brendan Aronson, and I am going to. I think when the U.S. takes on England, I am going to cheer for the U.S. because of Brendan. I've always been a club over country person, and so as the years go on, the more former Union players that play for the national team, I think just makes it a lot more easier to cheer for the U.S. But at the same time, too, I feel like people got to respect that I got into soccer because the first ever match I watched was U.S. versus Portugal in 2006 World Cup. And so I am partial to that because that's how I got into soccer. So it's like, I don't want to get away from that. And I'm fully invested into the England national team. But the more and more former Union players that play in the national team, it's like, okay, yeah, I want to be all in with the national team. But, oh man, USMNT Twitter is not fun. You guys know. And to see these idiots just get involved with Union Twitter and try to tell Union fans, yeah, we know more about the Union. We watch more Union games than you guys. Like, no, you don't. Shut up. Like, you guys watch some highlights on YouTube. You guys say that, oh, like, I've known Paxton Aronson was going to be good ever since he first joined the academy. Like, no, shut up. You did not. And, like, these guys are so dense. Like, you try to convince them, and it's just no getting through to them. And because of that, like, it makes it hard to cheer for the national team because those guys have a lot of terrible takes. But anyway, I'm sure you guys didn't want to be reminded of me being an England fan, and I'm sure I'll get slack for this on Twitter, which is fine. But there you have it. The transfer market values for the Union, for the league as a whole. And again, would love to hear what you guys think. I know I posted this on Twitter, and fans are okay with it. Some aren't. So yeah, if you guys haven't chimed in, definitely chime in on that post. But let's go ahead and talk about this FC Dallas versus Philadelphia Union game that ended 1-0 to Dallas. And if you would have just watched the first 10 minutes of this game and then turned it off afterwards, you probably would have thought that the Union would go on and win this game. I mean, they absolutely dominated the first 10 minutes of this game, controlling possession and keeping Dallas pinned down in their own half. They just couldn't break out of the Union's press. And the Union, they tried a couple long balls early on into their forwards, and it seemed like some chances would start falling to the Union. But full credit has to go to Dallas for weathering the storm and not breaking. Jesus Ferrer said at halftime that Dallas went in to this game with a mindset to spend the first 10 minutes figuring out, all right, how are the Union going to play? Figuring out what their strengths are, looking for areas where they could hurt the Union, what are their weaknesses. And to their credit, that's kind of exactly what happened. They allowed the Union to keep them pinned down. We saw a couple back passes that were like shots on Dallas's goalkeeper. Like, yeah, the Union did have Dallas a little bit rattled, a little bit confused. But then as this game went on, Dallas figured out how to beat the Union. You were getting Paul Arriola versus Jack Elliott multiple times, which shouldn't have been the case. It should have been Kai Wagner on Paul Arriola. But it wasn't. In my opinion, it's a total mismatch to have a fast-paced winger against Jack Elliott. It should be your fullback on a winger. And that, like I said, just wasn't the case. We saw that matchup multiple times throughout the game. Jesus Ferrer was dropping deep and making late runs into the box, and that's eventually how Dallas got their goal. And we'll break down that goal here in a bit. We saw Velasco, who's a winger. He would tuck inside the midfield, almost playing at the halfway line. And when he would push forward in the attack, he would always cut inside onto his right foot. And so I thought it was very interesting just seeing the way that Dallas approached this game, how they attacked the Union. And in my opinion, I think the battle of the night was between Paxton Pomykal and Ale Bedoya, because Paxton Pomykal was at times getting the best of Bedoya. I think Paxton was one of their best players on the night. He was excellent in the midfield, and like I said, just those battles between him and Ale Bedoya on the left side of the field for Dallas, yeah, they were very exciting, and I feel like at the end of the day, Paxton came out on top in those duels. And yes, the finishing was atrocious from both teams on the night, which is where you would say this game was won/loss for the Union, as they couldn't finish their chances, while Dallas finished one of their chances. And I'm not going to say that you're wrong for thinking that or saying that, but I think it is important, too, to really look what happened in the midfield. And I think, in my opinion, that's where this game was won/loss for the Union. Yes, you have to score goals to win games, to tie games up. But the Union weren't creating chances because of what was happening in the midfield. And you go ahead and look. Dallas, they had 5 interceptions on the midfield compared to the Union's 1. The Union got outpassed in the midfield. Too many missed tackles in the midfield. Too many turnovers in the midfield. Just a lot of mistakes we saw the Union commit because of that Dallas press. And again, that's full credit to Dallas from starting this game, weathering the storm, not breaking, and figuring out, all right, this is how we're going to attack the Union, and this is how we're going to beat them. And Jim Curtin did say midweek, too, they love playing through balls. They love having their 3 forwards get in behind. And that's exactly what Dallas did on the night with Ferreira at times, but more importantly, Paul Arriola. And the Union had the mismatch with Jack Elliott and Arriola, and it eventually cost the Union on the night. And look, I think, like I said, both teams were atrocious at finishing the ball. And I said in my match preview in my blog that the Union aren't going to have time on the ball. And yes, Dallas's front 3 is good with Velasco, Ferrer, and Arriola. They had 27 goals between the 3 of them coming into this match, which was the 4th most, if I believe off the top of my head, in MLS. But I said when the Union have the ball, when they stop Dallas's attack, they're going to have to transition the ball quickly from defense to offense. They've got to play those quick 1-2s. And the Union didn't really do that at all. And so that's why I say that the battle was lost and won in the midfield for the Union. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the finishing from the Union. It wasn't good at all. Jim Curtin said it multiple times after the game that their finishing was really bad. 10 shots on the night for the Union with only 3 on target. Where you look, Mikhail Ua had a chance on the 56th minute, which was intriguing because he tried to catch the goalkeeper off guard by shooting near post, but the goalie was never going to get beat on that. If the goalie got beat by that's just terrible goalkeeping, not good finishing from Mikhail. And then you had Jack McGlynn's free kick, which those 2 chances are the only ones that really stood out to me that were the Union's best chances on the night. And then the only other shot that was on target was Julian Carranza's long-distance shot in the first half, which was a little bit awkward for the goalkeeper. I don't think he was expecting that. But other than that, the Union didn't create any chances at all in this game. And that free kick of Jack McGlynn, that was probably the best chance of the night because Jack gets the ball under the wall and the shot never troubled the goalkeeper for Dallas. So, yeah, just not good enough in terms of finishing their chances, creating chances, and the chances that they created, they were weak chances. And, other than the goal from Jesus Ferrer, again, I don't think Dallas really created anything that really stood out either. Both Areola and Hedges both had headers in the second half, but neither of them really caused Andre Blake any problems. And yeah, this was a game that really did feel like it was going to end leveled at some point. And it wasn't the most entertaining soccer, but credit to where credit's due. It's a huge 3 points for Dallas. They deserve the 3 points because they were the better team at finishing their chances, even though, both teams had chances. Both teams took horrible shots, but when it mattered most, Dallas scored out of one of their chances. And I guess, really for me, and it is hard to talk about this game where not much happened offensively from the Union. Not much happened offensively from Dallas. I guess the only other thing that stood out to me was this was probably Kai Wagner's worst game of the season. He was caught out of position multiple times during the game. His crosses were terrible all night long, where he went 5 for 17 on them. And just, it wasn't a typical Kai Wagner performance. It wasn't what we've come to expect from Kai game in, game out. His passing was terrible, especially with that passing sequence that started with Jacob Glesnes, where Glesnes, who was in good positioning, he intercepts a pass from Paul Areola that was intended for Jesus Ferrer. Glesnes gets the ball, passes it out to the left touchline, expecting Kai to be there. Kai wasn't there. Kai was out of positioning. Like I said, Jack Elliott throughout the night was on Paul Areola. It should have been Kai Wagner. Kai Wagner was tucked inside. Don't know why that was, but he was. Jacob Glesnes wasn't expecting Kai to be there. And that's why he had a quick look over, like, why aren't you in your position in left back? You're playing like a left center back. You're playing in Jack Elliott's positioning. Made no sense. And so then after that, a pass from Jacob Glesnes, Paul Areola hustles to collect the ball, and a shot eventually is taken from Velasco. The Union get a goal kick. Jack Elliott had a terrible pass to Jose Martinez, who hustles to win the ball back. The Union get a free kick. And then Leon Flock and Jacob Glesnes both had bad passes that led to turnovers. And yeah, I mean, that just a whole sequence there in the 53rd, 54th minute. Yeah, that was probably the worst passing sequence we saw from the Union all night long. But again, that whole situation happened was because of Dallas just shutting down the Union in their own half with the press. The Union at times didn't have any answers for the press. One, they were dealing with the heat. And two, I think they were definitely caught off guard from the intensity that Dallas showed. But also, like Jim Curtin mentioned, it shouldn't be an excuse, the heat, because we're in the summertime, we know it's going to be hot. But at the end of the day, when you have more passes in your own half than the opposition's half, you're going to lose the game. Or you're definitely not going to win the game. And so that's exactly what happened. and nothing else really stood out to me. So let's go ahead and talk about my keys to the game that I wrote about. I said Union, number one, have to have quick transitions. Dallas coming into this game were fourth in MLS in pressures with 147.2 per game. And yeah, that passing sequence I just talked about, that's prime example where they need to be quick with those transitions because Dallas's pressures are going to be right there on you. And yeah, Union going to pass out, and it would have been a great opportunity for them to counterattack Dallas. And so, number one, fail. Two, you got to man mark. You got to stick tightly with those Dallas midfielders, those fullbacks, as they're looking to play those three balls into the three forwards for Dallas. And it didn't really happen much with Velasco, as like I mentioned, he was tucking into the midfield where you only had Paul and Jesus up front. But Dallas were looking for those passes multiple times throughout the night, and the mismatch, I'll keep talking about it with Jack Elliott and Paul, was taken advantage of a lot. And so right there, that's a fail. And then number two, the Union needed to have clinical finishing. Dallas came into this game with the ninth fewest shots allowed per 90 minutes with 11.7. Dallas also allows the fewest shots on target per 90 minutes with 3. Both of those numbers the Union had less than. They had 10 shots in the game, and they only had 3 shots on target. So, yeah, all 3 key points I thought that the Union needed to take advantage of, they failed at. And like I mentioned, Union can win the midfield battle, which comes down to the quick transitions, and they lose the game because of it. And it's honestly so hard to pick 3 stars on the night. If I had to pick anybody, number one, Andre Blake came up with 4 or 5 saves in the game. Nate Harriel didn't do anything in this game that I think causes the Union to go back to Bizo. I think they will go back to Bizo because they're going to look for more attack on the right side of the field. But, you know, Nate was getting further up the field than we've seen him in the past. Velasco didn't really trouble him at all because he really didn't attack his side. So Nate, number 2, and then 3, Jack McGlynn. I think when Jack came on the field, he offered a different intensity than the Union were getting for the first 60 minutes of this game. So him and Bizer were good subs, I thought, by Jim. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, the Union just didn't create enough, couldn't finish the chances, didn't win the midfield battles. And so if I had to pick 3 stars, even though I don't think there were any stars out there for the Union, that's the 3 that I would pick. Would you guys even waste your time talking about 3 players that impressed you? Probably not, but because I talk about it every week, that's what we're going with. And so let's go ahead and talk about this goal, the only goal in the game scored by Dallas's Jesus Ferrer. And so this comes from a throw-in from Dallas. They go from left to right and build out their attack. Nobody really pressures the ball when they switch the field to the right side of the field. And because of that, Dallas are just able to build out. And so they're just going to go ahead, carry the ball. Leon Flock's going to then, as soon as the right back picks his head up, then Leon's going to go ahead and pressure the ball. But yeah, the pressure really didn't affect Dallas at all. They're going to go ahead and just dribble around Leon Flock and then get the ball to one of the midfielders who Jose Martinez could have done a better job shutting down. He does not. Kai Wagner's push up the field. I don't know why Kai Wagner's push up the field on this play when Dallas has the ball. But regardless, it's that matchup that I keep talking about, Jack Elliott and Paul Arriola. And who's going to win this matchup? It's going to be Paul Arriola. Paul Arriola picks his head up, sees Jesus Ferrer completely unmarked, and he's able to take a touch around Jacob Glesnes, who's caught flat-footed. Terrible defending from Jacob, which we've seen in 2 of the 3 games that the Union played, which is surprising. But, you can't play perfect every game. But, yeah, I mean, just seeing the Union not pressure the ball, to see Jacob Glesnes get caught flat-footed here, and great finish by Jesus Ferrer shows why he's one of the best strikers in the league. But yeah, I mean, to see Jesus Ferrer start this play all the way at the midfield and then somehow sneak in past Jacob Glesnes, just really, really, really poor. Yeah, I think Ale Bedoya is chasing Jesus Ferrer. He knows, all right, this should be my guy. Nate Harriel has Velasco outright right. And because Ale lost his guy, Jacob should be able to pick him up. But Jacob, like I said, gets caught flat footed. Jose Martinez could have done a better job too, pressuring the ball when it was up at the halfway line, at the midfield line. Doesn't. And the Union just get caught out for being out of position. So, I mean, great finish, great touch from Jesus, but should have been better from the Union. No excuses why they were caught out of position. No excuse why they were late to the ball, but they were, and so they concede. And again, just credit to Dallas. I don't want to sound like I'm down, moping, not trying to discredit Dallas. Like they really did deserve all 3 points. They showed more hustle in this game than the Union did. So credit to them. And also, I didn't even have this in my notes, but like fans on social media saying, "Oh, another game that the Union don't care about." I mean, it's hard for me to say that the Union didn't care about that game. I think that it was just a lack of awareness on their part for being out of position multiple times throughout this game. So I think that's different than saying that they don't care. The Cincinnati game where Jose Martinez was jogging back, not showing any energy. Yes, you can say that game, but the Dallas game, that I don't think the Union weren't trying because in the second half, I forget exactly when it was, but they hit the Union on the counterattack. Velasco had a chance. Jose Martinez hustles back and forces the play not to develop for Dallas. So yeah, I mean, I don't see the Union not caring. I just see that the Union were not focused in for 90 minutes. So it is what it is, right? Only 4 losses on the season. Uh, and I'm also thinking to myself too, like imagine if the Union were terrible, losing a lot of games. Like, can you imagine in the early days? Like, I don't think there were any Union podcasts when the Union first started as a team where they were constantly losing. I don't think people would tune in to hear podcasters be negative week in, week out. Like, that's got to be so hard to do when you're covering a team in MLS and results aren't going your way. Like, how how do you find it in you week in, week out to show up, talk about a podcast, talk about your team? Uh, yeah, I don't know. It would probably be so strange to see people be okay tuning in, week out when the podcast is nothing but people complaining about the Union just sucking. And now we're spoiled with the Union being good, and now we have a ton of podcasters, that get to cover good soccer. So we're fortunate, right, that you guys get to hear positive takes and not always the negative ones, because it's easy to be negative when the Union are winning, but it's not easy to be negative when the Union are sucking. That's kind of my thoughts on it. Did I confuse you guys? Maybe. But let's go ahead and talk about Blunder of the Week. And so I got to give a shout out to my guy, Billy. He sent this to me from Nashville fans. So Nashville season ticket holders got an email that their home match on Sunday, August 21st against FC Dallas, there has been a change. And that change is for season ticket members who purchased a season-long parking pass. They will no longer be able to park in their designated section for this game against Dallas. They are moving the parking lots to different places around the city. Nashville will provide transportation to Geodis Park from these different parking lots, but this is a mess. It's like, how can you guarantee parking, make season ticket members, well, you're not making them. You're giving them the option to get a parking pass. They're getting a parking pass close to the stadium. They're like, this is great. And then you say, oh, yeah, this isn't going to work out. And so Nashville fans came up with this whole thread on social media where they can and can't park anymore. Where they say sometimes they can park in these places, sometimes they can't. But basically, majority of the season ticket parking passes are in the fairgrounds where the racetrack is. And so, from my understanding, the raceway doesn't want people parking on the racetrack anymore, because the talk is that NASCAR wants to come back to Nashville. And so if there's any Nashville fans listening to this podcast, if I have any of this wrong, please let me know. But from my quick reading of these threads, this is what Nashville fans made it out to be, where most of the fans are parking at the racetrack, but now the people who own the racetrack don't want that to be the case anymore, because NASCAR wants to come back to Nashville and use the racetrack. And so now, these people that paid for this season parking pass at this racetrack cannot park there anymore. Now they're going to go farther away from the stadium. They're going to have to get transported from these vans to the stadium, from the stadium transported back to these parking lots. I mean, what a mess. Nashville didn't go into this thing thinking that parking was going to be an issue, because the plan was to get rid of the racetrack and turn that into parking for Nashville SC. But that appears not to be the case anymore. And fans are ticked off, which I would be mad too, where you were paying for parking close to the stadium, and now that's not going to happen because Nashville doesn't own the raceway. And fans, like I said, just aren't happy. So that's going to go ahead and get Blunder of the Week. And if you guys aren't following the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, follow at Free Kick Pod. Check out the website, thefreekick.net. I'm going to try. I'm really going to try to do another match preview, this time for DC United. I was happy the way that the preview came out for Dallas. So like I said in the intro, if you guys read that, I really appreciate that. But you guys are obviously listening to the podcast, so I do appreciate that as well. And yeah, let's hope that the Union can be much better down in DC. Sorry if this wasn't, up there with one of my better podcasts. It's just, what do you talk about in a game that had no offense? It's really difficult to find things to talk about. So, I gave it a go. One thing I'm really excited for, though, is keep this open on your calendars. So when the Union take on Atlanta United at home, I believe that game's on a Wednesday, the 31st. August 28th is a Sunday. That's potentially going to be episode 200 for the podcast. And so I'm just throwing it out there now because I really, really, really want a ton of people to come on the Twitter Spaces. People that have never been on, people that have been on the podcast multiple times. Maybe you've only been on the podcast one time. I really just want to hear from the fans for episode 200, because if you guys have listened to every single episode of this podcast started with fans at episode number 1. And I've never got away from talking from the fans. I love talking with the fans. And yes, I could have never imagined that I'd be able to be in the press box interviewing players, Jim Curtin, having people come up to me at the stadium saying, hey, are you Todd, Free Kick Podcast, all that, blah, blah, blah. But I love talking to fans. This podcast was started to give fans the platform to speak their mind. And so episode 200, I really want to do a Twitter Spaces. I'm thinking maybe around 8 p.m. on Sunday, August 28th. I want to get a ton of people in there just talking about the team, talking about their thoughts for that Atlanta game, the thoughts on Union MVP. I mean, whatever we can talk about. I want to give you guys a place to speak and just see what episode 200 gives us. And if everything works out the way that I'm hoping it works out, then August 28th will be episode 200. But we'll see what happens here in a couple weeks. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.